gravel crunched under the tires of James's old truck, a lonely sound in the vast stillness of the valley. Dusk was a bruise of purple and orange bleeding across the jagged peaks that ringed Oakhaven, the village a scattering of dark shapes huddled by the ink-black surface of Whisperwind Lake. He hadn't been back in 15 years, not since the accident. Now his Uncle Thomas was gone, and the cabin, filled with shadows and memories, was his to sort through. James, barely 30 but feeling a lifetime older, stepped out into the biting late autumn air. Leaves, brittle and brown, skittered across the deserted main street. The air was thin here, sharp in his lungs, a stark contrast to the city smog he'd grown accustomed to. He pulled his collar tighter. Even as a boy, a trainee ranger full of naive confidence, this place had unsettled him. The lake, especially. The only light emanated from the hearth and hollow inn, its windows glowing like warm amber eyes in the deepening twilight. Inside, a robust log fire crackled and spat, casting dancing shadows on the rough-hewn walls. An elderly woman with eyes as keen as a hawk's and hair like spun silver watched him approach the counter. Martha, her name tag read. She'd been old even when he was a boy. "James," she said, her voice raspy, like dry leaves. It wasn't a question. "Heard you were coming, Thomas's cabin. It's been waiting." "Martha," he acknowledged, forcing a small smile. "Just here to settle things." She nodded slowly, her gaze unwavering. "The mountains remember James, and the lake. She has her moods, especially now, with the cold settling in." She slid a heavy iron key across the polished wood. "The cabin's aired, but mind the old ways. The paths get tricky when the mists roll in. Best to be indoors when the midnight bell tolls." "Bell?" James frowned. He didn't remember a bell. "Some hear it, some don't," Martha said, turning to poke the fire. "Just an old habit. Good for keeping folks from wandering where they shouldn't." Her words, casual yet weighted, settled uneasily in James's gut. He remembered the hushed village tales now, the whispers of lake guardians appeased with driftwood offerings left on the shore during the full moon, of eerie bobbing lights, will-o'-the-wisps that lured the unwary deep into the forest. His uncle, a practical man in most respects, had always seemed to give those tales a wide berth. Yet James recalled finding small, carved wooden figures near the lake path by their cabin once. Old habits die hard in Oakhaven, James thought, a shiver tracing its way down his spine that had nothing to do with the cold. The guilt, a familiar specter, stirred within him, the memory of the lost hiker, the failed rescue high on these same treacherous slopes years ago, a life he couldn't save, a weight he still carried. Sleep was a restless, shallow thing in his uncle's cabin. The scent of old wood, pipe tobacco, and something else, something faintly aquatic and unsettling, filled the air. Around midnight, drawn by an inexplicable restlessness, James found himself by the edge of Whisperwind Lake. The water was a sheet of polished obsidian, reflecting the star-dusted sky. Mist, pale and ethereal, coiled like breath over its surface, blurring the line between water and shore. The silence was profound, broken only by the occasional sigh of the wind through the skeletal branches of the surrounding pines. It was a beauty that pricked at his unease, a dangerous allure. He remembered the hiker, Sarah, her terrified eyes as the scree gave way, his outstretched hand just inches from hers. The guilt was a cold stone in his stomach. Had she heard the whispers of this lake, felt its pull? Then it came, faint, hollow, and deeply resonant. A single bell toll, seemingly from across the lake, or perhaps from beneath its still dark waters. Midnight. Martha's warning. James's breath caught. His heart began a slow, heavy drum against his ribs. He scanned the opposite shore, but there was nothing. only the impenetrable blackness of the forest. And then he heard it, a soft, almost inaudible singing. It wasn't quite human, more like the wind given a sorrowful voice, a melody that tugged at something primal and forgotten within him. His gaze, drawn by the unearthly sound, flickered to the edge of the woods, where the mist clung thickest. There, weaving between the dark sentinels of the pines, were lights, pale bluish-green orbs, dancing with a slow, hypnotic grace. Will-o'-the-wisps. He dismissed them as swamp gas, as folklore, during his ranger training. But these moved with an intelligence, a purpose. They beckoned. The narration here should slow, the voice dropping to a hushed, tense whisper. The air grew colder. The singing, though no louder, felt closer, entwining with the mist, with the silent invitation of the lights. James felt a strange pull, a longing mixed with a profound dread. It was the same feeling he'd had on the mountain ridge with Sarah, that terrifying sense of being on the verge of something irrevocable. He thought of his uncle's carved figures, of the villagers' hushed reverence for the lake guardians. Were these their emissaries? Or something else entirely? The rational part of his mind, the ex-forest ranger, screamed at him to turn back, to retreat to the relative safety of the cabin. But another part, the part burdened by guilt and a strange nascent curiosity, was rooted to the spot, watching the spectral ballet unfold. One light detached itself from the others, drifting closer to the path that led from the lake into the deeper woods. It pulsed gently, an invitation. The singing seemed to focus, calling his name, or so it felt. Or perhaps it was Sarah's voice lost in the wind. He didn't consciously decide to follow. His legs simply moved, one foot in front of the other, drawn by that single beckoning gleam. The mist swirled around him, damp and cloying, obscuring the familiar landmarks of his childhood. The trees loomed like skeletal figures, their branches grasping. The narration should pick up pace here, sentences shortening, building a staccato, heartbeat-like rhythm. The light danced ahead, always just out of reach. Deeper and deeper. The air grew heavy. He was lost. The ranger's instincts, once so sharp, were blunted by the unnatural stillness, by the disorienting dance of the will-o'-the-wisp. Panic, cold and sharp, began to prickle. The singing was all around him now, a chorus of sorrowful, alluring voices. He thought of Martha's warning. The paths get tricky. He thought of his uncle, who had lived his whole life by this haunted lake. Had Thomas made his peace with these woods, these lights, or had he simply known when to turn away? He tripped on an unseen root, sprawling onto the damp earth. The light winked out. Darkness, absolute and suffocating, enveloped him. The singing intensified, swirling like a vortex. He could feel a cold breath on his neck. No! The cry was torn from him, a raw sound of pure terror and defiance. Sarah! He wasn't sure why he called her name. An apology? A plea? His own voice echoed back, distorted, amplified by the strange acoustics of the fog-bound forest. And in that echo, for a terrifying moment, he thought he heard another voice join his. A faint, sighing response. Then silence, or almost. The distant hollow bell tolled again. Once, twice. Its sound cut through the oppressive atmosphere, chilling James to the bone. Did James stumble out of the Oakhaven woods that night, shaken but alive, his own desperate cry having somehow broken the spell, or perhaps mistaken by the woods for one of its own? Or did another light, pale and bluish-green, join the spectral procession by Whisperwind Lake? Another soul lured from the path by the mournful singing and the hollow promise of the bell? The final toll hangs in the autumn air, unanswered. The mist continues to coil, holding its secrets close.